All right. So hello, everyone. Welcome to EyeRes's third advice session, where we invite ophthalmology educators to lead discussion on topics related to the application process. My name is Jeffrey Nguyen. I am a fourth-year medical student at the University of Maryland, and I'll be one of the moderators for today's session. Stacy and Chris are our other moderators. Chris is going to come in a little bit late, but Stacy can introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. My name is Stacy. I'm a fourth-year medical student at University of Texas in San Antonio. I'll be the other moderator for tonight.
So today, our topic for discussion will be on the rank list and Altus. The session will be 1 hour long. First 30 minutes, we'll be asking the questions to Dr. SooHoo, and then last 30 minutes, we'll open it up to Q&A session that you can ask any questions. Feel free to put it in the chat or just unmute yourselves for that last 30 minutes. And with that, I would like to welcome our guest speaker today, who is Dr. Jeff SooHoo. He's an associate professor of ophthalmology, assistant dean of admissions, and the residency program director at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. So Dr. SooHoo, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. What is the general audience? Is it mostly fourth years or not necessarily?
Not necessarily. We have a mix of all years, M1s through M4s. We have international medical graduates, and like research year students. So you got a whole variety here.
Okay, great. For those of you in the current match cycle, hope it's going well. Apologies if we didn't interview you. We get a lot more applications than people were able to interview, so it's not personal. The other thing I'll say at the beginning is anything that I say about the process, SF match, Altus, APO is all my opinion and doesn't reflect either the University of Colorado or any of those organizations. So I just call it like I see it, but people may disagree. So
thank you, Dr. SooHoo. All right, so we're going to start with the first topic, which is the rank list. Our first question is, Dr. SooHoo, can you give us a little bit of insight into how the ranking process is structured? Maybe talk a little bit about how it's done at your school.
Yeah, and that's the only thing that I know. I've only been involved in a rank process at the University of Colorado since I joined the residency leadership about a decade ago. We do 3 interview days, and then we meet after that last interview day to do our rank meeting. We require that all the people that are interview on all 3 days. And what that allows us to do is have some consistency in terms of everybody has met every candidate, and every candidate's met the same faculty member. So we try and make the process equitable in that fashion. We then look at sort of the whole picture, right? So in each of, the way we started, just to sort of speed things along, is each of our interview rooms has 2 or 3 faculty members in it. They keep sort of a running rank list within that room, just how they see it. And then those, it depends on the year, but we have 5 interview rooms this year. Those 5 rooms are averaged together to give an initial just sort of generic kind of list. And then we look at where people are and try and move people around based on, discussion that we have. We also have applications available to us during that meeting. So for us, it's not just about how people perform in the interview, but rather we try and bring it all together and get a picture of the applicant as an entire person. And at that point, that's sort of, we have that meeting, it takes several hours, and then we sort of have a rank list at the end of that. And it typically doesn't change much at that point, unless there's something crazy that happens.
Right. And when you are looking through those applications, what are some of the important parts of people's applications that you're looking for?
I think there's a bunch of ways to think about this, and I'll say that everybody's going to bring their own bias to the table when they look at applications. So some people might potentially think research experience is more important. Some people might be more interested in what someone's clinical evaluations have been in their MSPE or Dean's letter. Someone else might be more interested in their story and personal statement and where they've come from. Everybody sort of has their own things that they might think are more or less important. And I think people bring, like I said, their own biases to the table when they think about those things. I think the other thing I think about when I'm looking at an application is, sometimes I do see sort of that traditional well-rounded applicant, right? So someone that's sort of done all the things that y'all know or you're supposed to do. And then I think I also see applicants that are what I call well unbalanced, where maybe they haven't checked every single box, but they've gone really in depth in one particular area and really shown a lot of passion and commitment to something. whether that's a volunteer organization, whether that is a research project, whether that's leadership within your medical school. There's sort of a bunch of ways to demonstrate those things. And if you do something really in depth, it might crowd out the space you would have for something else because there's only so many hours in the day. So I think about that as well. So it'd be nice, of course, to say like, this is what's most important, or this is what committees care about. But the reality is that there isn't a single answer. If there was, it would already be on Reddit and we wouldn't have to have this conversation.
Yeah. Right. And it's nice that you really look at it holistically. And I guess the best advice is just to do what you're actually passionate about and what you're interested in.
That's what I would say, as long as in some way that translates into something that residents care about, right? Like, I mean, don't just, if you're really passionate about something that has nothing to do with medicine and nothing to do with any competency that we care about as a residency program, then, do that in your spare time, but also do some of the other things.
Yeah, that sounds great. And one of the major changes that's happening, I guess, like with this cycle and on, is step 1 is now pass and fail or fail. And because of that, do you think there are other parts of the application that are more emphasized, or do you think like step 2 will become kind of the same thing that step 1 was before?
So, I mean, philosophically, step 1 should be pass fail. And I think it's a good thing that it has gone pass fail, because the reality is it's a licensing examination. It was designed as a threshold examination, and it was never designed as a differentiation tool between applicants. And there's really nothing other than some correlation with board pass rates. There's nothing really to say that someone with a better or worse step 1 score is a better or worse resident. So the idea and the concept of it going pass fail is sort of the correct thing from a programmatic point of view. And that's what's going to happen. Step 2 will go pass fail as well in the next several years, for sure. If you read the original announcement, the MBME basically said it in the original announcement. They're just trying to slowly rip the Band-Aid off. But the other reality is, the more information that you take away, the more emphasis there is on the information that's left. So this is my argument against, I don't think step 1's the right answer, but I think we, as a program director community that is trying to holistically evaluate applicants, we need standardized tools that tell us how applicants are with some kind of comparison, because the reality is there are better and worse medical students and there are better and worse residents. And I need some way to try and get at that. Step 1 is not the right way to do that, but it was something that people used because it was available and it was felt to be standardized, and it is and it isn't, and it's got its own baked in bias. But if you go to pass fail preclinical grades, which most schools have, you go to potentially pass fail clinical grades, which there's a growing trend towards doing that. Step 1 and eventually step 2 go to pass fail. The MSPE is a compilation of comments from your clinical narratives, but for a variety of reasons, those tend to be more positive comments than negative comments. And it's sometimes hard to tease out any specific details sometimes about students' clinical performance, particularly when not contextualized with grades. And then what's left, right? Your application, which is fine, the things you do, but you craft that. And so in some ways, you've got control of that narrative. Your letters of recommendation, which anybody should be able to get 3 letters of recommendation by the end of 4 years of medical school by people that like you. And B, it overweights those, right? Am I going to now be more inclined to, if I read a letter from someone I know, does that have more emphasis versus someone I don't know? So, my whole thing is, I don't know what the answer is, but you can't just take things away and give me nothing else to work with, is how I think about it.
Right. And I guess that's what we'll touch on in a little bit, where they added like Altus for this year, and we'll see how that goes in. And I guess now that we're in the interview season, how important is interview performance, and are applicants pre-ranked before an interview, or is everyone kind of on the same playing field when you receive that interview?
I think it depends on the system and how it functions. I mean, because we do go back and look at the application during our rank meeting, we're certainly not a program where once you're at the interview, if you interview great, you're number 1, and if you interview poorly, you're the bottom. Like, that's not how our system works, because we don't want 10 minutes especially in a Zoom interview room, but in any interview room, to to overshadow 4 years plus of really hard work in a variety of different domains. The way I think about the interview process is, what information do I need to gather that I haven't been able to gather from your paper application or your medical school performance, right? So we're trying to assess different competencies that we expect of our entering residents. And so, I can assess a lot of things from your paper application, including, some of your clinical skills, or, maybe certainly, your academic aptitude if there's grades. But I can assess your, maybe teamwork or verbal communication skills, or, the way you think in a nuanced way about a situation or a question that we might ask you. And so that's what the interview does for us. So we don't have a pre-rank per se, but the interview performance certainly factors in. That's why we do it, but it's not the be all and end all.
Yeah, I heard a lot of programs just saying, like, when we interview, we're just trying to see who's the person behind the paper, does it match up, and trying to get a feel if they're the right fit for the program.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I'm looking for narrative consistency, right? So if I'm reading about you from your letters of recommendation, your clinical evaluations about how great you are and whatever, and then you can't really formulate a coherent answer to a sort of a basic question, then those things for me are a mismatch.
Exactly. And then with your residents, do they have any role in the ranking process, or do they contribute in any way when you rank applicants?
We haven't historically had residents as part of our interview or rank process. And it's not to say that we don't value their opinions, because we certainly do in a variety of ways, and particularly within our residency program, they have a very loud voice in terms of how things are run. I think we've tried to keep the line whereby when our applicants are connected with residents to get information about the program, and that's the best way to actually get information on a program, right? Is what's actually happening, boots on the ground, what do the residents think? And so unfortunately it's over Zoom, but the Zoom social, I know, and are two words that should never go together anymore. But before Zoom, we actually had an in-person social, which was, I'm told, a lot of fun. I didn't go, of course. And even the Zoom ones, I think, are okay, just to get a flavor of who the residents are, and the residents spend time with the applicants on interview day. And we want that to really be for the applicants to know that they can just ask questions, and and that the residents aren't influencing the process. So they really don't in a huge way. I mean, certainly they will give feedback, both positive and negative, if they have, I'd say, like an unusually positive or unusually negative interaction. And our visiting students, our residents spend a lot of time with. So certainly it's not that the residents aren't involved in the process, but they don't have a formal role in the process.
Right. I guess it's different for every institution. Some
people, I know a number of institutions in which the residents interview and sit on the committee and do rank lists, and I'm not against that. We just haven't done it historically, and and also programs do it different ways. They'll do it with their senior residents being involved, but I've also seen it where their PGY2s are involved, because the PGY2s would be the seniors for the group when they interview. So I think there's a bunch of different models that can work. And, I'm not against having our residents involved, but once again, we've just tried to sort of keep that line where applicants can go to residents and know they're just not being evaluated all the time. It's just, it's just exhausting to feel like you're always being evaluated in every little interaction.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I agree with that for sure. Next question is, does regional preference or family ties play a role in ranking applicants? For example, will you rank an applicant higher if you anticipate that they would be happier coming to the program based on the regional or family ties?
No, we don't. And this is probably my personal bias coming into play. I had zero ties to Colorado. I think I maybe had visited the state one time in my life before I matched there. And I've been here for, 13 years. And so I just don't think, if you've trained in one state your entire life, okay, like maybe you got a bunch of scholarships and, that was a better way for you to finance your education. Like, I don't know the reasons why you are where you are, why you would go where you would go. So, we don't have a good way of teasing that out. So, that being said, we don't actually adjust our rank list on this, but I do think applicants are better off where they would be happiest if they can sort that out, which I mean, I guess that obviously makes sense in some ways, but I have noticed over the years that, when we have residents who, and we don't ask them, right, but residents sometimes will tell us, in the process, they ranked us highly or where they ranked us. And when we have residents that really want to be with us, they're great residents because that's where they want it to be. And, I think when if you're not someone, and not everybody's going to rank us first that matches with us, right, which is the reality of the situation. But, if we're someone's last choice, like they're probably on average going to be a less enthusiastic, less engaged resident, which is too bad. So yeah, I mean, I'd rather have people that want to be here, but we don't really factor it in because we don't have a way of doing that equitably and really understanding, how close you are to your cousin that lives in Denver or whatever.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And then we were talking a little bit about, ways to have more like objective measures of expressing interest or to show like genuine interest in a program. Right now in other specialties, they're doing something called preference signaling. So I was wondering, is there any intention for the SF match system to adopt a preference signaling in the upcoming match cycles? And if so, how do you think that will affect with like extending interviews or ranking?
I think it's certainly something that they've considered and are actively discussing. The SF match, I know from my discussions with them and just being part of the process over the years, one thing they're really focused on is making sure that whatever changes they make don't negatively impact applicants. And I think with something like signaling, there are potentially negative downstream consequences that you don't see right away because it sounds sort of amazing, I think,
Right.
when you sort of talk about it at face value. And so I think they're wanting to be cautious and, you see how things play out with some of the data that comes out over the next few years. But I think, and off topic, but a great example of sort of the way SF Match thinks is the open house sort of window that they created. And that's a nice thing that we have the ability to do since the match is really, it's a different timeline than ERAS and NRMP. And so like our program lists have to be in at whatever that deadline is. I should probably know, but my coordinator will make sure I know. And then there's that window where people can visit programs and then applicants get to put in their rank list. So there is literally zero way that you visiting or not impacts your rank on my list at all. I can't even see who's coming to visit till after our rank lists are submitted. I can see that there's 7 people coming, but I have no idea who they are. And so that was just sort of a very like clear way. They said, we want to do visits, but we have to, if we're going to do it, we have to do it in a way where applicants can't, by perception or reality, be negatively impacted. And so I think that's how they feel about signaling too, which is, sounds like a good idea, worthy of discussion. But let's not go too quickly. And I think also with Altus coming in this year, which I know we'll talk about more, I think that would have been a lot for people in one year to have like sort of 2 big things. So
yeah. And it's hard to find like that balance if they implemented it. How many signals do we get? Because if you do too few, it's like you're required to signal some programs, and you do too much, it becomes like not as valuable.
Right. And so I think that'll be interesting this year because, the last year there wasn't really much to go on, right? It's like ENT and then a few other things. And then, there's certainly a lot more programs participating this year with sort of a huge range, right? 3 signals in some specialties, 30 in orthopedics.
Yeah.
I think it's OB that's got like gold and platinum or some other different types of signals. Tiers of signals, exactly. And then there's questions of like, would you do single signals or could you batch your signals? Like you get X number and you could give them all to one program or you could spread them out. So that's the other problem is there's so many permutations of the way to do it and nobody really knows the right way. And so, what is that optimal number? I do think it's to have a formalized system for applicants to truly say, in a limited fashion, these are the places that I'm really interested in. You're one of them. I do think that would be nice because, I do get a lot of random emails that I'm really interested in your program. And I see the applicant side of it, which is you want to be an ophthalmologist and it's not, it's a competitive market and there are more applicants than there are spots. So, applicants are going to do what they can and they should do what they can to, to be successful in the match. So I don't begrudge them that, but it's not an ideal process.
Yeah. And then last question for this topic, on the applicant side, when we are making our rank list, do you have any advice or like important factors we should consider when making the rank list?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on this. I think you've heard it probably from people, but I think going with your gut is really important. There's something about walking away from an interview or an experience with a place and saying, these could be my people. I'd be happy to spend, 3 to 4 years here, and I feel like I'd get good training. There's something about just, the places that I've trained for everything, undergraduate through fellowship, have all been places that I've just had a gut feeling I'd be happy at. Reputation, I don't know. You can look at all the different rankings, all, till you're blue in the face. And at the end of the day, I do think there's pros and cons to different types of programs, but they're probably more similar than they are different, right? I mean, we all have the same ACGME guidelines and have to provide some basic amount of education and surgical training and whatnot. And then there's going to be programs that are better or worse for you based on sort of what your career goals are and what your interests are. And I think it's hard to see this, but there's, it's hard to assess for potential or opportunity in some ways. But, I'll be transparent. I did not match it the #1 place on my rank list. I ranked things on my rank list higher than the University of Colorado that were better names, at least at the time. I think the names sort of change over time. But there was actually a lot more opportunity for me at the University of Colorado. There was just, it was a growing department that was open to new ideas and wasn't really stuck in its ways. And, there's a lot of sort of big name places where I wouldn't have been program director 3 years out of fellowship. Right. And so, it's hard to see that. You can only sort of see that looking backwards, hard to see that moving forward, but.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. A lot of people have told me, like, just go with your gut, go with, who are your people, is what I've also heard.
Yeah. And then here's the other reality is it's a rank list. And so you will, hopefully match. And if you do match, it may or may not be at your top choice or your second choice or your third choice or your fourth choice. Now, it's going to be, and so then you have a couple choices. You can wallow. My rule is you get 2 days to wallow after the match if you're not happy. And then you have to move forward. You want to be an ophthalmologist. You've got it accepted to a place that provides accredited ophthalmology training. Mm-hmm. So go and find out what they have to offer. And then if they don't have what you want, how do you build that, right? Mm-hmm. If they don't have the community or culture that you want, well, what do you bring to the table? And what do you and your co-residents do to foster that? If you want some global health experience and they don't have it, well, find a mentor and create one, right? I mean, yeah. Or you can keep wallowing and be miserable, but what's the point? Like,
exactly. No, I definitely agree with you with that.
I'll just answer the chat question. I would say top of my list is code for you're not #1. And so tell me I'm #1 if I am, and great. And then then otherwise, it doesn't really matter. It also doesn't change anything. My rank list is made. So, you could be dead last on my rank list and you told me I'm #1 and I'm glad you like my program, but it doesn't change anything.
All right. We're going to move on to the next topic, and Stacy's going to lead it.
Yeah. Before we get started with the questions, I'm going to give Dr. SooHoo a break from talking, kind of explain what Altus is. I know that we have a lot of different level of medical students here from first to fourth year. And for me, I was kind of unfamiliar with this when I started. So I'll kind of explain what Casper is, what Altus is. So Casper, from my experience, I did it for medical school. So some of you guys might be familiar with it, but they kind of expanded it to include 3 parts now, and it's required for ophthalmology and some of the other specialties. So it's divided into 3 parts. It's Altus, Snapshot, and Duet. So Casper. Casper is like the same thing as before. They give you scenarios, ethical scenarios where you kind of have to write out answers depending on what you think it is. They also added another part where you can do a video response where you record your answer in a video. And it's kind of testing for your ethics and your interpersonal skills, your communication skills through these scenarios. Snapshot, they described it as an asynchronous interview. So basically, you do a video recording of yourself for 2 minutes answering questions that are like interview questions. And then these videos get sent to programs for the programs to view directly. So it's another way for them to kind of evaluate you depending on the interview question that you get. And then the last thing we have is Duet, is basically they give you a bunch of criteria. What matters to you? Research, leadership, what do you value in a program? So you kind of divide that and then you select on a spectrum how much each thing matters. And then the program does the same thing, and they kind of see if your values match up with the program's values. So these are the three aspects of Altus that we're going to discuss. And then this was the first year that we started incorporating this into the application process. So this is new to us. I'm sure this is new to the program and the program director. So we kind of want to give an insight to see if this will be an important factor in the future. So with that, I'm going to start with the first question we have prepared. So I know each program kind of approaches this whole process differently. There are programs that look at the Casper results before or after the interview, or it doesn't even look at the results at all. What is your insight, Dr. SooHoo? How do you go about doing this?
Yeah, I'd say it's so new that it's hard for me to actually say this is what we're going to do or how we're doing it. I think the goal this year is just sort of getting both programs and applicants familiar with the sort of assessments, and sort of thinking about, you know, where within our sort of application funnel and application timeline that we can make best use of these tools, and sort of understanding where and or which of those components is most useful in certain situations. So it's a sort of a cop-out answer, but I honestly don't know, and I don't think anybody does. But this does go back to the earlier part of our discussion where, you know, I know from an applicant side, it might be, oh, there's this other thing to do, and we don't know what it is, we don't know how it's going to be used, and I totally understand that. But the reality is, once again, when you take stuff away, you've got to, ideally you add something in that gives us some kind of objective information. Casper is what I think I have the most familiarity with, and many of the applicants do, especially if you took it as part of your admissions process for undergraduate medical education. But the data for graduate medical education is newer, and so we just have less information about it. But once again, it goes back to what I was talking about before, which is the concept of assessing as many competencies as we can before you show up or before we, you know, bring you into the program. And so, you know, ideally, Casper has the ability to discriminate sort of different thought processes and a nuanced view of looking at different situations, and helping us sort of rank applicants in that way, and using it as a piece of the puzzle, and in a standardized fashion. So I don't know what, you know, I don't know which of the three is the most important. I think Casper certainly has the longest track record, and so is probably potentially the most useful at the front end. But it's just like anything else, there's no correlation with any of these things that we're talking about. And that would be this magic bullet, right? If you could say this score on X equals this performance in anything, but it's not true for SATs and ACTs, it's not true for MCATs, it's not true for your GPA, it's not true for a letter of recommendation, it's not true for anything. And that's the big problem, is trying to get information that's reliable and has some validity and then leads to some sort of desired outcome. The feedback loop is also really slow, which is the other problem, right? So I'm gonna maybe, you know, I've got Casper scores from this year, 2022 to 2023. People start in 2023 as interns, they graduate in 2027. You know, that's 5 years from now. So, and the numbers are small too, you know, I mean, we're a big program, we have 6 residents a year. So that's one of the reasons that we really needed the community to sort of buy in, is that any individual program, you know, can't make heads or tails of it if all you have is 6 people that come through a year and the feedback loop takes 5 years. And so I think, you know, the goal is to sort of band together and say, you know, where have you found this useful and what does it translate into? And even, you know, and we want to be systematic about it, right? Is there, let's say, for instance, for those that aren't familiar, there's something called ACGME milestones, which are sort of different criteria during residency that you're assessed on, and that you're supposed to, in different competency domains, medical knowledge, patient-centered care, surgical skill, different things. And so, you know, how do these different things, step one, Casper, clinical grades, whatever we're talking about, how does it correlate, for instance, with milestones or with something that's a little bit more objective, So I think there's a lot of opportunity. I think there's also the flip side, which is maybe it's not that helpful. Maybe it's not predictive of what we want it to predict. And I'm open to that. I'm not arrogant enough to think that it's going to solve all our problems. But I think it's good for ophthalmology and other specialties that are doing it to be looking at other information that potentially assesses other competencies other than just what are your cognitive skills, right? How have you performed on standardized tests?
Right, I agree that it's definitely another factor that you can look at to look at applicants. So if you were to give any insight on the future direction of this, do you know if it's going to be continuing for future application cycles, and then which kind of direction are programs heading towards, like looking at the results of the Altus?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll, ideally, I would like to see it continue for a few years at least, because if you 1 year of data is completely useless, I would say. And once again, even if you get multiple years of data to really understand it, it's going to take a long time to see if it really matters, because the numbers are small and because sort of the things that we're assessing are sometimes hard to really pin down as well. So yeah, I don't know. Hopefully a few years. That being said, could someone else come along with something else that actually has a different that assesses things in a different way, or has some kind of validity that Casper and or the other parts of the Altus suite don't, possibly.
Right, and I think this is so unfamiliar with all of us that it's kind of up in the air for a lot of parts. So if you were looking at the traditional metrics like board exam scores, research, all of those, how does Altus weigh compared to those other factors?
For me personally, I look at it as one factor among many. And so similar to what I was talking about with the interview performance, if you've had sort of a stellar run through medical school, you've done great in everything, and all of your letters are, this is the best medical student I've ever worked with, and you've got a subpar Casper score, I'm not that excited, right? Like maybe you had a bad day, or maybe it's just, not your jam, but your 4 years of medical school performance don't outweigh that. And vice versa, you're the bottom of your class, you've got the top Casper score, like, sorry, but you're in the bottom of your class. Like we are fortunate in ophthalmology to, be able to recruit people that have performed well in medical school. And the hard part is maybe most of you probably don't get well, maybe you do. If you get like a financial statement from your bank, right? It's like when you're investing, it says past performance is not indicative of future success. It's their classic disclaimer. And it's sort of like true for this as well, right? Just because you did well in medical school doesn't mean you're going to be a good resident. However, on average, someone that's at the top of their medical school class versus someone that's at the bottom, I think I'd rather have someone that's at the top. Because on average, they probably worked harder. Not always, right? Some people are just naturally gifted in certain domains, or maybe the grading scheme is heavily weighted toward something, I mean, it's impossible for me to know on an individual med school level. But, I think it's sort of one of those things. If you asked, just a consumer out there, do you want your doctor to have been at the top or the bottom of their medical school class? You're going to get a very clear answer. Once again, it doesn't mean that they're right, but on average, it's probably true.
Right. So the next question is, looking at the three components of Altus, Casper, Snapshot, and Duet, is there one component that holds more weight than the other? I know you said Casper is the one that we're the most familiar with, but we're trying out Snapshot and Duet. Do you know if one's going to hold more weight than the other?
I don't. Yeah, TBD.
Okay, so looking specifically at snapshot responses, I know there are recorded videos that get sent to programs directly. What are programs looking for in applicants' responses?
I mean, I think programs would be looking for sort of a succinct answer to the question that is sort of a well thought out, coherent response. How do you communicate? How do you think about a situation? Sort of, frankly, it's sort of similar to what we're doing in the interview process too. So I think back to your other question, I think what we'll probably end up at if we stay with this platform is that there's probably points in the process where different elements are more variable. Because for instance, reviewing snapshot is much more labor intensive than looking at a score. And so watching the snapshot for all 700 of my applicants is a big lift and not something that is probably realistic. But if I am down to, hey, I've got 3 interview slots left, like these are the 10 people that we're considering, yeah, maybe that might be a good place in the process to watch the snapshot, right? Or, we're in the rank list and I'm trying to decide, where these X people should be, should we shift them up or down? That might be a good point to use something like that, right? So I think I don't think there's any one that's necessarily better. I think there might be parts of the process where they have different values.
Great. So the last question we have for this session is, do you think Duet is a good way to figure out if an applicant will be a good fit with the program?
So one thing I'll say is, I think what we've tried to do is think about Duet a little bit differently, even though it's easy to talk about fit and to think about value alignment, and what are the values that the program really holds in high esteem and what do applicants want. I think the problem with talking about fit is fit sort of assumes that there's a right way to be within a certain program, and I think there's a chance there to bias yourself towards selecting for sort of comfort and familiarity and sameness, when actually our goal is probably the opposite, to diversify the profession and to have people come through the door that think differently or work differently and find ways to work together and take care of patients. So that's my disclaimer there, is I really like to think about it more as a value alignment, although I understand why people talk about fit. It's sort of like an easier way to sort of think about it. And they might be talking about the same thing, but not always. So I just want to be careful about thinking that way, that, if you don't fit in, that you can't be successful in a program. I don't think that's fair. But yeah, I think it has the potential to add value. I think of the 3, it's the one that I've had the hardest time really figuring out a way to integrate, because I don't know exactly what it means. Whereas I think, and I don't know what any of them mean, to be fair, but I think Casper has sort of a very sort of more specific sort of set of competencies that are being assessed, and then Snapshot's basically a pre-recorded standardized interview. And so I think we can all sort of understand what that might mean or how to use that, and Duet's just a little bit different. So I think it has a lot of potential. I think one way we could even think about using Duet is sort of later on in the game, right? So let's say you come to my residency program and then we sit down and look at your Duet score and say, hey, like, here are the places you and I, our program and you were super aligned, and here are the places where you were looking for more of whatever, and we maybe don't have as much of that. Maybe I'll pair you up with a mentor who has more experience in research or in clinical, whatever it might be, that we as a program maybe have less sort of alignment, and that might help you in that process. So maybe it guides some of the activities you get involved in within our larger GME, because there's different committees you can be on and different things. So I think there's some opportunity there too, and not really just in the assessment, recruitment, match piece, but later on in the process.
And I agree. I think it can be used at multiple levels. I mean, at least for me, when I did Duet, it kind of got me thinking about what do I want in a program. So having those values compared side by side, I had to choose on a spectrum how much I value each factor. It kind of got me thinking, what do I look for in a program before I started the whole interview process? It was a good practice for me.
Yeah, and I like that they were really, whenever you're comparing things, neither of them are bad things, right? But you do have to choose, like, which of these 2 good things do you value slightly more, even if it's 51% to 49%, I lean this way. But I think it is a good thought exercise. And yeah, so I think there's some value in that as well.
Thank you. So with that, we're done with the questions for the Altus section. Now we would like to open up for any questions for the participants. You can either type it in the chat and I can read the question out loud, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Is it right if I ask a question? All right. Thanks for being here, Dr. SooHoo. My name is Mike Heron. I'm from the University of Nevada, Reno. I'm a current second year. So my question to you would be, what kind of weight does in away rotation hold with you guys? And how important is it to be prepared ophthalmology wise, like to be able to do a specific exam ophthalmology, like an ophthalmology specific exam, because that's something we don't get a ton of in our third year. So I'm just wondering if there's, should we be going away and learning those skills on our own somehow before we come on an away rotation?
So, I mean, I don't expect you to know anything about ophthalmology really until you're an ophthalmology resident. This is me personally, I can't speak for everybody. And one of the problems is even when you do like fourth year rotations in ophthalmology, it's then like almost 2 years until you're an ophthalmology resident, other than the few months you do during intern year, right? So my stance on it has always been, I can teach you ophthalmology if you show up ready to learn and willing to work hard. And I can't teach you a lot of other skills. It's sort of one of those, everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, right? It's like, I can't teach you how just to be nice to the ancillary staff and how to be a good teammate and sort of this other stuff that I need you to do to function well in my program. I can teach you ophthalmology if you come with the right background and willingness to learn. I think the more you can do, the more potentially the better the rotation will be for you. But it's not really because we need you to, how much we were evaluating how much you know. I just think you'll get to do more if you can do more, right? So if you come in with some skills, in some of our clinics, there's an opportunity for you to, go see a patient on your own or work someone up or, get their history or do their exam and come tell the resident or the attending what you saw. And if you don't have those skills, you just can't have that experience. And so it's not that you need to, or we're not dependent on visiting students to work up patients or see patients, right? But if you don't know how to use anything, then you're just it's just gonna take you longer to get those positive experiences that come from being an away student. So as much skill as you can come with, I think is helpful. I recognize coming from a school like yours that doesn't have a home residency program, it's a little more challenging, right? There's just not as many built-in rotations. It's hard to just at my medical school, someone can pop into my clinic for half a day walk 10 feet from the medical school and show up. And that's not always possible in schools that don't have their own residency program. So we recognize that. But I do think, the more experience you have, the better, but it's really more for you. You'll learn more and you'll get a better sense of how you might function in our program as a resident if you visit with more skills. I'd say away rotations are important, particularly once again, when you don't have a home residency program. It's your opportunity to understand how residency programs differ and or are alike, and how they function, how they're set up, and just to be boots on the ground and for us to get to know you over an extended period of time. We don't interview everybody that does an away rotation with us, but we do find ourselves interviewing a lot of them because we have a positive experience with them, and our residents say, or our staff or our faculty says, yeah, we could work with this person, we'd love to teach them. So it goes the other way too. We've had people visit who are residents and faculty or ancillary staff have said, this person, from a sort of skills and what they bring to the table is actually probably not the best for our program. So it doesn't always go in your favor.
Gotcha, thank you.
Sure.
Dr. SooHoo, I had a question for you as well. My name is Matt Spano. I'm a third-year medical student here in Louisiana. And my question for you is in regard to the research. If you have someone who does a research year, from a program director standpoint, do you view someone who, let's say, did a research year after their third year of medical school the same as you would someone who did a research year after earning their doctorate degree, after they graduated? Or is there a preference one way or the other for how a research year is evaluated?
Oh yeah, I don't think I care about the timing of it. I think what I care about is, what did you learn and what are the skills that you gained during the research year, and what does your research mentor say about their experience with you? I'll even go a step further. And for me, I don't even care if it was in ophthalmology, frankly, because, you might have changed your mind or learned about ophthalmology late. It's not core curriculum in most medical schools. And so, if you did a research, probably not a whole year, it's unusual, but we see it occasionally. But if you did a bunch of research in, orthopedics, dermatology, pediatrics, whatever it was, and your person says, hey, Matthew was amazing, did everything on time, didn't have to be reminded about anything, functions independently, gets along great with all members of our team, produced XYZ, in this amount of time, I'd love to work with them in the future and have them on my team. I don't care if it says, right, none of that's specialty specific. Those are just skills. And those are skills I want in my residents. Do things on time, great. Do things without being reminded, awesome. Works well with ancillary staff and other members of the team, perfect, right? Like I just need that. I don't really need you to, and I need you, if you want to do research, I need you to know how research functions and how to do it, how to ask questions, how to investigate it, how to, do the data analysis and whatnot. But once again, you can gather those skills across different domains. I think the only, specific to your question, I think the only potential advantage is there's probably some sort of baked in advantage to still being in medical school when you apply in the match.
Thank you. I appreciate it. That was a great answer.
Hey, Dr. SooHoo. My name is Amisha. I'm a fourth year at the University of Connecticut. I was wondering what your thoughts are on like the personalized personal statements that was introduced this year. I know we don't necessarily have signaling as we were talking about earlier, but applicants could write little blurbs to programs just telling them they were interested. And I was just curious about how your program was viewing that during this year's application cycle.
Most of my faculty just viewed it with surprise because they were just confused. They're like, how did this person write this special message to me? The vast majority of applicants don't, I think, do that, at least not across the 70 average programs you apply to. And it's just not really logistically feasible and just seems like a lot of brain damage. So I think it's fine to pick out a few schools that you are really interested in. If you have a specific reason and to do it, I think it's okay. I think it's new enough, and since not everybody's doing it, it's so hard to know, like, did this person not do it because they actually don't care about us, or do they just not want to write 70 different personal statements? And both are acceptable answers in my mind. So this is an instance where I do think something like signaling has an advantage, and that it's a little bit cleaner and everybody understands it, because it'd be even different if you were allowed like a certain number of personal statements, right? And you could then, but yeah, it's not something that I've lost a lot of sleep over, so hopefully you haven't either.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective.
And just my perspective also, so others may think differently.
Dr. Stewart, a quick question about interviews. Post-interview communication, like thank you letters, or like you were saying, like letters of interest or letter of intent. What are your thoughts on those?
I mean, it doesn't change things because we've made the rank list. So I think a thank you letter is always a nice thing, but we don't track it. So if you didn't send one, I don't have the idea that I have like the energy to track down like which of these 60 people sent me a thank you or not. Like, no. But I think in the world, I think thanking people is a nice thing. But you don't. But then you might not get a reply, and then you like overthink it. Oh no, they didn't write back to me, so they hate me. And it might just be that they get 1,000 emails at this time of the year, which is what happens to me. So, and then same with like letters of intent and whatnot. I mean, as we talked from Marcus's question earlier, I do think it's fine and okay to say program, you're my number one. The only way that helps is if you do match with us, then I know that you really wanted to be there. And like I said, I do think residents that really want to be somewhere just are happier and do better, which makes sense perhaps. But yeah, but then, there could be programs where someone gets an email and they're like, oh my gosh, this changes everything. Like, I don't know, but that's just not how our program functions. So.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's not helpful. Just do whatever, I don't know, do whatever feels right, but you don't need to, email every program.
Yeah, don't lose sleep over a thank you message.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
have a personal question. So having gone through residency training yourself, is there anything that you didn't consider as an applicant before you submitted your rank list that looking back, you think you should have considered or wish you would have considered?
Totally. I was very narrow in my thinking. I crossed off like entire geographical sections of the country because I thought I would never want to live there. And in doing so, missed out on applying to some really great training programs where I would have had great experience, I'm sure. So I think sort of not being narrow-minded when you're talking about what is in actuality is a really short period in your life, 4 years, and just thinking, where do I think I can get the best training? And I think it would have been good for me to, step out of my comfort zone and, live somewhere else potentially. I'm super happy with how things have gone, and been very lucky, but yeah, I was a little bit narrow-minded. I think that'd be the main thing that I would do differently. Landon, no, I don't. I'm kind of agnostic about it. I don't think that I can sort of mold people into any one particular thing, right? So people are going to do what they're going to do. And I don't think you even know what you're planning to do beforehand. Wasn't planning to be in academics, right? It's just sort of the way my career has gone. It was the opportunity that was in front of me. When I was finishing fellowship, I needed to stay in Denver, or wanted to, sort of logistically and personally. And so I looked at private practice and academics, in the Denver metro area, because I was just looking to stay and didn't want to have to uproot my life at that time. So no, I don't think it does. Now, that being said, I think I would sort of, once back to our earlier conversation about a cohesive narrative, right? If you're telling me you want to go into academics and you've done like 0 academic things in your trajectory, right? You haven't done some real research, or you haven't been involved in, some kind of leadership within your medical school or med ed, or, other kind of academic type activities, then I'm sort of going to, that just seems a little odd to me. There's a little bit of a disconnect there. So I might be confused by the lack of cohesiveness in the narrative of your application and what you're telling me versus what you've done. But I don't particularly care. My goal is to produce good, high quality ophthalmologists that are going to go out and make a difference in the world. And I think you can do that in a bunch of different ways. The other thing that's hard to see from your vantage point is that academics and private practice are not these like completely opposite black and white, yin and yang different things. There are some academic practices where you could work clinically and be just as busy as a private practice ophthalmologist and really function in a purely clinical way. And I know a lot of private practice docs that do a ton of research. And sometimes research is easier to do in private practice, right? Because, the IRB might be a little bit easier to navigate, and sort of the contracts with the companies for doing a phase 3 trial might be easier than going through the 7 layers of legal infrastructure at your particular university and whatnot. So it's not as sort of cut and dry as you might think.
I have another question, Dr. SooHoo. Just something that I was curious about with the recent shift from the traditional personal statement to now having, like the short autobiographical statement, and then the short answer questions with the SF match. Just from your perspective, how has that really had an effect on how you're able to perceive applicants before their interview?
I mean, I really like it. I think it creates a little bit of structure to what was previously an unstructured thing, where you just like, we're not exactly sure. Am I just supposed to tell you why I want to be an ophthalmologist? Am I supposed to have some like sob story about my life that needs to, like, what am I supposed to do? And I like the idea of being able to say like, no, we want to hear in a short format, like, these are specific things we want to learn about you as a person. And there's some choice involved as well, where you sort of get to say what you want to answer for some of them. So I think it's a nice change. I think it takes some of the pressure off having some sort of singularly crafted, wordsmith thing. And, I think what the what it says to me when I read the prompts and then when I read the answers is I feel like I'm actually learning more about who people are and what they value, because that's what the questions are asking.
Thank you.
I have another question, if that's okay. So I noticed that at Colorado specifically, there's quite a bit of faculty support. I've talked with a couple people there, and it seems like compared to other larger academic institutions, you guys are able to kind of have that one-on-one mentorship still. And I'm just wondering, how is it that we as applicants can kind of tell that apart in specific programs? Because sometimes it's kind of hard if you haven't had exposure speaking with people there at the program and things like that. What are good ways for us to learn about the programs beforehand without being able to speak with people one-on-one?
I mean, I think the easiest thing to do is to talk to a resident, because once again, they just know what's really happening and how the program really functions. And it's actually not as hard as you might think, right? If you get on, Discord or Reddit or whatever y'all are using today, and you say, hey, does anybody know a resident at the University of Colorado? 100% sure someone does, right? Because someone went to medical school or someone matched there a few years ago, or someone's cousin's sister knows somebody or whatever. It's just not hard to find people these days. And so, or email me and I'll connect you with a resident. But that's what I would do at programs. It's a little bit of legwork and you don't have to do it for 60 places, but if there's 10 places you really want to know more about, like track down a resident. And then if you can't, right, if the residents don't want to talk to you, or I don't know, that sort of tells you what you need to know too.
Good answer, thank you.
All right, we have time for one more question and then we'll wrap it up.
I'm really good at awkward Zoom silence, so I can wait you out for sure.
All right, I'll just have a last question for you, Dr. SooHoo. This is more for like future applicants. When they start looking at letters of rec, you get 3 letters of rec for ophthalmology. Do you have a recommendation on what each of those letters of rec should be, like from different ophthalmologists or from like internal medicine or sub-eye?
No, I mean, I think sort of the traditional talk is 2 ophthalmology and 1 other. I don't think I think 3 ophthalmology is also fine. I think 1 ophthalmology is a little bit suspect, like it's just 1, that just seems kind of weird. That being said, once again, programs have different setups, schools have different setups. Some schools have a program, some schools don't, so I think we recognize that, the quality of the letter, of course, is going to matter more at the end of the day. So what is the longitudinal nature of this person's relationship with you? In what capacity have they observed your work, and what competencies can they speak to? And what is their experience assessing and comparing medical students? And so those are the things that are going to matter to me. And once again, I think maybe I'm a little more unique in this area, but my thinking on it has never been very specialty specific. So if someone in another specialty writes you the world's nicest letter and says, all I want is for this person to do my specialty and be my doctor and take care of my mom or whatever it might be, then once again, I don't really care what specialty that was in, because I can teach you the skills within ophthalmology.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Thanks.
Yeah, but 2 and 1 is like your standard answer. So
Right.
Yeah.
All right, and with that, we'll wrap up today's session. Thank you, Dr. SooHoo, for taking the time to chat with us and leading the topic discussion. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time to join us today. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.